Thanks, Helen. Welcome to CPA Australia's webinar, Quality Management for Audit Firms, How to Get Started. My name's Melissa Reid and I'm the Senior Manager of Professional Standards at CPA Australia. Today we have people joining us from all over the country. So I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. Well, today's webinar will comprise of 3 presentations, followed by a panel session where we'll get to put our questions to the presenters. But firstly, I'd like to introduce you to our expert presenters. First up, we have Len Dewey, who is the Deputy Chair of the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board and a KPMG Global Partner. Len will provide us with context today on the board's project to develop the quality management standards and provide an overview of the standards. Jessie Wong, who is a KPMG partner, will talk about the development of a system of quality management and provide her perspective and reflect on the challenges she's experienced in a large international network. And finally, we'll have Liz Joost, who is the Managing Director of Qualitas Consultants, advising SMPs on their practice management and auditing methodology. She'll discuss practical steps for implementation of a system of quality management and the impact on audit methodologies for small and mid-tier firms. We'll address your questions in the panel session at the end, and you can submit them at any time throughout today's presentations in the Q&A box. Please direct them to all panelists. If you have any trouble entering in questions or hearing today's webinar, please use the chat box with the host. It's now time to get our session underway. We look forward to hearing from them all today, and I'd like to first invite Len to kick us off. Thanks, Len.
I just want to do a sound check.
Hi, Len. Sorry, we are unable to hear you.
Okay. Can I just check? Can I just check?
We can hear some echo.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine now. Thank you.
Can I just check whether you can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. My apology for the technical difficulty. And again, thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the CPA members today. So I'm going to be focusing on, in terms of the standard itself, particularly on a system of quality management that the IWSB has approved and put out last year. For a start, I just want to make sure I don't seem to be able to advance my slides. Please just take a look whether. Okay. So I have my slides again. Apologies. So thank you again. So I'm going to be focusing on the system of quality management as a standard, and I'm happy to join by Jessie and Liz. They'll be providing a practitioner's view in terms of applying the standard. And for a start, I thought maybe just give you a background information is how we got here. Many of you know that the System of Quality Control Standards, ISQC1, has been in use for about 20 plus years. The IWSB made some revision about 15 years ago during the Clarity Project. But largely, ISQC1 has not reflected the recent audit oversight framework that has been adopted in many countries. In the past, before Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, pretty much was under a professional body self-regulation framework. So ISQN1 was set up and also based on input from stakeholders, regulators, practitioners, in terms of we need to do something about quality control management standards and control standards in the past. So there was a project a few years ago to look at post-implementation of the Clarity project. And the IWSB also had a invitation to comment process in place. From that process, the IWSB identified that system quality control ISQC1 and ISO 220 and also ISO 600 are the three key standards needs major revisions. So from that process for comments, IWSB reached out to some of the global, regional, and national regulators in terms of what has been observed from the inspection findings in some of the major jurisdictions. And the common theme from the feedback has been recurring audit deficiency from inspection of engagement. So the regulators told the IWSB, perhaps when you look at quality management, it's not just on the engagement level. We need to step back at the firm level. Because if audit deficiencies keep recurring every year, that means something is not done right. Maybe the firm needs to be accountable in terms of making sure that some of the deficiencies observed at the engagement level year to year gets to address at the firm level. And also hearing from the regulators, one of the things is that the firm has adopted a checklist approach, a compliance mentality in terms of complying with the ISQC1. So it's a lack of proactive culture and also proactively managing the risk facing the firm, the audit practice. Then lastly, accountability at the firm's leadership level has been identified in some of the inspection findings. And this is an area that the IWS will try to address in the new standard. So just quickly, when the IWSC mentioned quality management standards, it's a whole suite of standards. I mentioned from the invitation to comment process, ISQC1, ISO 220, and ISO 600 were highlighted as the major standards for revision. So throughout the project, we identified that also set up a new standard called ISQN2. In practice, there has been engagement quality control review, but the standard itself has never addressed what the quality engagement reviewer needs to do, and also qualification of those reviewers. So as part of the process, a new standard was formed to address engagement quality management from the firm's perspective. And the ISO 220 is focusing on at engagement level, individual engagement level, the engagement partner, the engagement team in performing all the procedures. Then ISO 600 is the one that focuses on group engagement. With the globalization of economy and more audits involving multiple firms, multiple auditors in multiple jurisdictions. Also based on some of the recent changes in accounting standards, consolidation process, combined financial statement, equity type of investee. So managing quality, not just on a single engagement, single entity level, but across border, across entity, across segments, how management run their business. So these are the quality suite of the standards when we talk about quality management. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk about the standards and leave it to Liz and Jesse to talk about the implementation. I think this is a slide. It's very important that the standard has been issued, was approved and issued, And the date, December 2022. Okay, that's the date that ISQN1, ISQN2, ISO 220 will be effective, and 600 has been approved by the board a couple months ago and will be effective a year later. But so it's important that we're into February this year already. The firm needs to be at least on a path to that effective date. So to start with, maybe perhaps just a quick overview in terms of the system itself. ISQN1 has gone through major significant changes, but the fundamental also for ISQC1 is still embedded in the new standards. The approach the IWSB taken for revising the quality management standards is introducing a risk-based approach. I talk about that the firm are used to a checklist approach. In terms of way forward, also encouraged by the regulators, the IWSB have reached out to, is the firm needs to take a proactive approach in managing quality. So through a risk-based approach. So risk-based approach is an iterative process. You're going to see a diagram on the left that the several components has been built into system of quality management. And you'll see that firm's risk assessment process and monitoring remediation process kind of loop around all the components. And the centerpiece is governance and leadership. And the regulator has told us that because the mentality to comply with the existing standards based on a checklist approach, it's important that the system quality management, how the firm manage quality, is a continuous process. So systems running on a continuous basis, and monitoring quality, improving quality is also should be on a continuous basis. It's not a one-time checklist project. The system has been running continuously. One of the challenges has been that when you write the standards in the scale, is how do you address scalability? I know many of the CPA members are from small, medium practitioner practice. So the standard itself is trying to be scalable. There are a number of areas in the ISQN1 standards with a reference on a more complex firm, less complex firm. At the end of the day, it's based on the type and nature of the engagement the practitioner perform. And that should be the starting point in terms of designing your system of quality management. So as you can see, a number of components on the left side. I'm going to be focusing on 3 or 4 that most important ones. To start with, the governance, the leadership. The way standards is being laid out is tone at the top, culture of the firm, lead by example, and also specific responsibility to the leadership of the practice. For example, the senior partner, the CEO of the firm, the chairman of the firm, or if you are in a larger, more complex structure, maybe a managing board, there are specific responsibilities. This is one thing that the regulator is asking IWSB to enhance and clarify. Often, the regulator finds that when you go speak to the firm, there's so many partners, and they're not exactly sure who's ultimately responsible. So in the standard itself, you're going to see some of the terms and references about a person who's ultimately responsible for system quality management. There's also a reference about the person operationally responsible for system quality management. And also in the diagram in the previous slide, I talked about a different component. There'll be different component owner, also control owner for each component. So clearly identify who's responsible for what in the system of quality management. Another thing that's been focused on is culture, commitment to quality. Firms' role in serving the public interest has been highlighted, embedded throughout the standards. and how those public interest mandate impacting the firm's decision. One of the areas we've been challenged by the regulators, investors, and general public is how financial performance, financial operating priority might impact firms' delivery of high quality services. For example, just an example we heard from the regulator, for example, such as when you agree a fee with your client and the fee calls for 1,000 hours of staff time, partners time, but when you agree to the fee, you also have a budget. Unfortunately, the fee might be impacting, or the budget might be impacting the fee, or vice versa. In some of the inspection finding, the firm has been cutting staff because they have certain set recoverability criteria in meeting financial performance. So from that perspective, the standards try to address the firm's resource planning, including at the engagement level, and also in terms of your strategy, needs to have public interest in mind rather than just a financial commercial interest in mind. That's been highlighted in the governance and leadership component. Next thing I want to touch on is the risk assessment process. This is probably the centerpiece of the ISQN1, which Jesse and Liz will probably go into detail. This is a proactive way of managing quality and set up system quality management. It's a three-step process. Each firm should establish quality objective for their firm, and there are actually a set of prescribed objectives in the standard. But we know firms with the different sizes and also offering different type of services. So there might be additional quality objective that the firm needs to establish in addition to the ones that's set in the standards. So once you have that quality objective, you start identifying areas that might have risk that's limiting the firm to achieve that objective. For example, one of the risks could be that you don't have enough technical resources. How do you address that? Your quality objective is to, for example, perform high quality audit, so the risk could be resource issues. So how do you address those risks? So you identify that's a risk area, then you design, implement responses to address those risks might impair your ability to achieve that quality objective. So that's the fundamental difference between the old ISQC1 and ISQN1 is that risk assessment process. And the IWSB, in consultation with a number of stakeholders, also practitioners, we're leaving the design and implementing the responses to address those quality risks to the practitioners, to the firms, because nature and circumstances might be different between the firms and the type of engagement the firm perform. However, as I said, that there are some prescribed quality objectives in the standards. So there are some guidance in terms of how do you design implementing responses to address those prescribed objectives in the standard. And next thing I want to focus on will be the resources. ISQC1 only focus on human resources, but with the evolution of technology, with the also complexity of some recent standards, IFRS and other standards, disclosure, financial reporting standards, it's important to address that resources is not just human, but the talent, but also how do you incorporate technology? Also, clients are using more advanced technology. So as a firm, as a practitioner, how do we perform audits using the latest technology tool because our client has moved on to a more sophisticated IT systems? And also intellectual resources that try to address with financial reporting standards. If you're a listed company, the disclosure framework need to understand. You also need to understand how fair value works. And you might have to work with the fair value valuation specialists. So all that incorporate into one component, resources. Need to make sure the firm are sufficiently staffed, also have the right technology and right technical resources to support engagement in the field. And also, how do you develop talent? How do you retain talent in the firm? We know that talent has been an issue. It's a global issue, not just a regional issue. There might be less people coming to a profession. So, how the firm design its system of quality management to attract talent, maintain talent, training them, very important. Also, try to address resources you're gaining from external sources. For example, when you design implement system or when you perform engagement, you might need external help. So how do you address resources obtained externally? And also want to make sure that the service providers you engage, they're high quality, and there's a process to make determination how those external resources service provider meet your quality objectives, or whether they poses a quality risk to your practice. Next thing I want to focus on will be on the apology moving forward. Okay, sorry. On monitoring mediation. Monitoring mediation has been touched on in ISQC1, but it has been enhanced and highlighted in the ISQN1 standards. In ISQC1, the monitoring mediation is focusing on engagement. For ISQN1, the monitoring mediation is not just on the engagement level, but also at the system quality management at the entire firm level. So you have to continue to monitor that, make sure the system's working, and also cover at the engagement level. There are some specific requirements in terms of when you have to inspect engagement partners. There's some guidance in there in terms of based on the time and nature of the firm, and also complexity of the engagement and type of engagement you perform. There's some guidance in terms of how often you should inspect your engagement partner's work. Also, specific guidance on establishing a framework to evaluate findings, whether it's from internal inspection or external inspection. But for those identified deficiencies, how do you address that and making improvement? So the number of area, for example, in terms of you also need to make sure you have resources to perform monitoring and mediation throughout the year, and how those findings, improvement or responses being communicated to your leadership and engagement team going forward. We know that this standards try to address the upper end of practice that the firm join the network on a global basis. But also small medium practitioners, they also have their own networks in terms of alliances, or in terms of networks that are helping each other in terms of consolidating their resources and leveraging on some of the methodologies to perform audits. So there's a specific chapter in ISQN1 dealing with firms' responsibility when they are in a network. For example, IT policy procedures. But at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility for firms' system quality management sits at the firm level and not at the network level. The firm needs to evaluate network imposed requirements, methodology, policy procedures, whether they meet the quality objective of the firm, also whether there might be risk involved if the network's policy procedure or methodology are not high quality. So there's a two-way communication, two-way consultation, iterative process in terms of how the firm work with the network in terms of establishing system of quality management. The next one to focus on will be on the implementation guidance that the IAASB has put out. We know it's going to be a challenging standards at a global level. So we have produced videos, provide overview of the whole suite of quality management standards, not just ISQN1, but ISQN2 and ISO 220 and 600 will be followed later this year. Because the global impact, we have done the videos in 4 different languages, and they are posted on YouTube, or you can access them through the IAASB website. There's also a implementation guidance for ISQN1, and many of the practitioners have so far give a very positive feedback in terms of that guidance. So if you have not seen it, I would encourage you to take a look. It's on the website. And also the basis of conclusion and the fact sheets that accompany the ISQN1 standards will be a great tool for you to better understand the standard. Then we also know, based on some of the feedback, is perhaps more guidance is needed. So there's also another video has been posted since we issued the overview video is more focused on the perspective on initial implementation efforts. So I think it'll be a great tool for you to watch in terms of practitioners sharing their perspective on the initial implementation. But also we also had a 4-part webinar series posted on our website, provide a deeper dive to ISQN1, and all those are in English. Also, we made some translation to Spanish. And lastly, on the LinkedIn page, that's on the IAASB's LinkedIn page, there are also a series of guidance being posted. So I would encourage you and welcome you to access them to help you understand the standards, also guide you through the implementation process. So some key takeaways before I leave it to the practitioners to dissect the standards, provide you with their perspective in applying the standards. So definitely start early, don't wait. We are into 2022 already, and the effective date is December this year. And also, when I talk about proactively managing the firm's system of quality management, so I would encourage you to use this opportunity to think about if you want to run a good practice. I'm sure many of you run a good practice. Are there areas for improvement that you wish you had a chance to spend time on and go through that whole process? This would be a great opportunity to step back and look at how you manage your practice. And also, as I said earlier, this is a continual improvement process. This is not a one-time compliance exercise to comply with a particular standard. This is a continued improvement, and the firm need to build that into your mindset, your leadership responsibility, and also make sure that if you are in the leadership of the firm, make sure you are responsible. Don't just delegate and assign. Make sure you actively involve and take initiative to managing that whole process in designing and implementing the system of quality management. And I said that in the standard itself, we actually has role profile set up. And if you're subject to inspection, I'm sure the regulator will look at the person who's ultimately responsible or operational responsible, their roles in the system quality management design and implementation. So I would definitely ask you to take a more proactive approach and get involved. And also, we know it's a challenge, so make sure you ask questions. A lot of good guidance has been issued by the IWSB, but also CPA Australia is also in the process of issuing guidance for their members. I would encourage you to participate in some of the discussion group forums. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and apology for the technical difficulty at the beginning. And I'll turn over to Jessie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Len. I feel like I've gone on the journey all over again, hearing Len talk about when the standards got developed and where the importance are and regulators' view on that. So that's been really helpful. And thank you for the opportunity, CPA, for this time to speak to everyone about this really important topic that's occupying a lot of my time at the moment. I feel like I've been working on system of quality management, or I fondly refer to as SOQM, for quite a long time now, and seems that there's no end to this. So I'm glad Len talked about the iterative and ongoing process. I will just move forward the slides, skip my name, and go on to the first one. So thank you, Len, for the overview. And I know myself and Len and Liz, we've been tasked to provide our experience in our implementation journey in our respective practices, and also perhaps share a little bit of the challenges that we've met, and also if we can share some tips with everyone online today, as I assume we're all in different stages of the journey, and also presumably have different roles in the implementation and ongoing operation of the system of quality management in our individual practices, or even so from, say, perhaps from the network perspective, a few of us online might also have network responsibility to help the network implement SOQM across its member firm. I wanted to start by picking up Len's point about just making sure everyone's on board. From my personal experience, really at the start of the journey, which is many, many months ago, I think to get a good start to the journey and to get the process right, it's really, really important to get everyone on the same page as to what SOQM really is. I know Len mentioned that we are not starting from a blank page. We know about our QC system for a very long time now. But really having gone through the process, it's helpful at the beginning. And even though it might take a few rounds to discuss this with our leadership, to discuss this with people who will be leading the work, and also to get it into the mindset of our junior engagement team members and infrastructure people, staff persons, on what SOQM is. What is my role? I know we hear you talk about it, but I'm not really sure how it fits into my daily job. That's actually been quite an important aspect of getting the work started. I know we're all keen to dive into and making sure we comply and get the hands dirty, but setting the tone at the right tone from the beginning is important. So what I wanted to share is sort of a piece of sort of a diagrammatic representation that I've used in communicating what this is all about when I go and talk about this whole project, as you like, within my own practice. So I've sort of looked at this at two pieces. So in the terms of an audit, we can probably think about SOQM as, really the system and the controls part of our file. So on the orange side of the picture, on the left-hand side, it captures the two brand new standards that Len's talked about. The firm and practice will be very familiar, and we often think a lot more about the blue part of the diagram, which is on the right-hand side, which is all the ISAs. We probably already have very mature processes to bring in changes to our audit methodology. Then talked about ISA 600, ISA 220. So that part of the practice should really be very mature. So the challenge for us is then to educate our practice in all their roles, how the two come together. So I often talk about the fact that the quality that we talked about, the trust that we want to get with our regulators, with our clients, with the public, is actually a combination of both these pieces, the orange and the blue. If I can use an abstract example. So if we think we all love to eat out, and I know Australians love eating out. So if we think about a restaurant setting, Well, I would say the orange part, what would that be? Well, that would be, as a start, I make sure my restaurant is located in a good location, accessible with a lot of foot traffic. I have beautiful renovations, great fittings, great and high quality tables and chairs and cutleries and whatnot. I make sure I hire good cooks that are experienced and know what they're doing. And I have good serving staff and servicing and kitchen staff that are well trained and well resourced and have access to good raw materials, right? My ingredients. So that's the orange part of the whole picture. And when we go to the blue part, then the final experience, the eating experience would then also be reliant on how we execute the night. When people come in, it depends on how the cook cooks the food, whether he's focused, he's following the steps that he should in the recipe, whether our serving staff is in the good spirit with the right mindset, and we're doing a really great job in engaging with our customers. The combination of all those factors and elements then is the outcome of the quality of the experience for the customers and the tastiness of the food. So I hope that helps. I've been trying to give this example within my own context to help people really put this together. So I just wanted to share that, and hopefully it helps you to get that message across, because for those of us who work on implementation of this quality standards on a daily basis, we talk technical terms, but it's really important to get people to know what we're talking about. So the journey later on just becomes a lot more easier. And I welcome you sharing your experience in the chat box as well. I know we're all in different environments with regulatory expectations. So it'd be really good to hear what other people are experiencing as well. Just going on quickly on to the next one. So as a start, what we did was we really looked at the differences. Of course, we are challenged by the fact that we often get the message that, oh, okay, we have the QC, so it's another instance of piling on a bit more improvements, taking a look at what ASQM it's incremental, and what the new regulatory requirements do that, and we're fine. Maybe that's the mindset at the beginning, because we don't want to frighten everybody and say, well, look, we have something to start from and let's start building on it. But very quickly, as we dive into looking into the requirements, just the basic of how the standards being set up, and then as you hit what Len talked about, the risks, the RAP, the risk assessment process, it quickly became very evident that we needed to take a fresh look at how we are going to do this and how to walk through this process, and importantly, how to embed this into a business as usual approach for the firm, much like we do for audit methodology. Because we quickly understood that that's really the only way to demonstrate that we as a firm are dynamically and proactively managing our quality management system. In the green points, what I tried to do is put a list together, and hopefully for those of us who are just starting up in the journey, to think about some of these key areas, which I've come across and found that they are sort of the deal breakers that we should really be thinking about in order to get this right. We, as a practice, we as practitioners as well, and particularly for us who has network as a support, which is fantastic in this circumstance, we are proud of our policies. We know we have good processes and already responses and controls. But as you can see, the ISQM 1 standard has a lot of new introductions of areas such as technology, and it's just a really refresh rewrite of the whole landscape. So don't be surprised if you come across the need to have to implement new policies and also put in place new processes as you get through the requirements. Len talked a lot about accountabilities. I cannot support his points more. We really do need to get our chairman, our senior partners, our heads of functions on board this. Take as much time as you need to educate them and to help them understand what their role is, because this is very real. We do anticipate regulators coming in, and Len has pointed out, wanting to know how accountabilities and responsibilities are allocated when it comes to SOQM. Whose responsibility, and whether the chain actually expands sufficiently to make sure everyone understands they have a role to play. And the point that Len talked about on role profile is a really, really helpful one, because as accountants, I think we resonate with seeing things on paper. So that's probably something to think about. On risk assessment process, Lynn's talked a lot about that, and I know Liz will also come in from how to get it started from a smaller practice perspective. Being a large complex firm, and the firm that I worked in, we operate across 3 different jurisdictions and 3 different regulatory environments. That has been extremely challenging to do. Just thinking through, as auditors, we should be very good with doing our risk assessment to begin with. So just using that skill set that we have and applying that to within our own practice is a good way to start. And documentation, I don't think I have to go too much into that. We all are challenged by our regulators on our audit documentation. So now it's a different spin on this. How do we document how we do risk assessment process? So what risk have we considered? How do we respond to this risk? How do our policies fit in to address this risk? How our processes are being controlled, and whatnot. So these, just making sure documentation is sufficient. Again, the standard's not yet effective. It is a question as to how much our regulators would be hoping to see. But I think Len's point about just getting help and discussing this with fellow colleagues and other practices would be a good way to start. While also wanted to emphasize on the localization, KPMG, as being a network, of course, we've got network requirements and network approach to this. But in my own experience, the localization of that work has taken up a large part of my time, and necessarily so because we all operate in different regulatory environments. So just a plea perhaps is, as we go and think about our methodology to do SOQM, don't forget that your local standards, in the case Australian standards, or your other industry-based requirements might have additional impact on how you build your SOQM in the new world. So a quick reminder on that. On designated teams, just for large complex firms, be a good idea to start thinking about maybe getting people to lead that work and to drive it, because it is and going to be a long process to get to the end point. And also importantly, it will be an ongoing process as well. We'll come to monitoring and remediation in a little bit, that being a key area of the standard that's new. And finally, just evaluation. We are required in the standard to do the practice to have an annual evaluation at the end. So it's something good to use as a tangible output as we talk to our leadership and to the teams in the practice, that, look, guys, we really have to get our act together and take this seriously, because we have to make an assertion about this at the end, and be likely very publicly as well, given the high profile of the standards with regulators. I'll spend the next 10 minutes or so just quickly going through my experience and perhaps share some thinking points on the different components. Len's talked a lot about governance and leadership. I completely agree. In my own jurisdiction, regulators ask me a lot about how we are just thinking about what are the risks in governance. Yes, you probably got a board, you probably got managing committees, and you've got your leadership role. But really, what is your governance culture? What is the turn from the top? We want to see that there's clear risk accountabilities, and importantly, I think a lot of these things we've all have in place, and communications from our leadership is happening and on the ground. It's nothing new. But the challenge is, how do we demonstrate that? There is now a risk assessment process. How do we link that back to objectives? We need to be able to articulate these to our regulators, and really demonstrate that the whole governance structure is setting the tone for quality in the firm, and that leadership is walking the talk. So demonstrating this, I envisage will be a very important part of demonstrating compliance with the standard. On RER, relevant ethical requirements, and acceptance, I think of them as a very closely linked of the two components. These are large pieces of our practice, as you can all know. Our regulators, I believe in Australia as well, and where I practice in China, regulators ask and are very focused on our client acceptance process and making sure we're independent and comply with ethics requirements. Again, I think this is a good area whereby we've already have many internal processes built up and in place. It's working. The chains are working, and the wheels are turning. But in this case, I think the time where we've had to spend is looking at the environmental changes. There is no doubt that apart from COVID, we've got financial situations in our own jurisdiction in Australia, China, US, etc. We need to be able to demonstrate how these are being embedded into our clients' acceptance and engagement continuance processes, because these are very real risks that regulators know we're facing, and we need to be able to demonstrate in our risk assessment process how we respond adequately to these environmental changes. Again, maybe the last one I'll raise is because this is such a big area with lots of processes in our own practices and many people involved. The trick is and the challenge is ensuring that these processes that we have in place and responses that we put in place are consistently executed. It goes again to the monitoring and remediation component, because all the SOQM engine they're all linked. Big areas equals to challenges with consistent execution. And I think this is one of the areas that we would like to focus on as we look at enhancing our processes. Next on engagement performance. Again, I think this is one area that is more mature in our current QC systems. So perhaps not a fresh start, which is good to hear. But again, it is an area that the ISSB and regulators talked a lot about. We know you are leading your team. We know you're staffing your team. We know you're monitoring them. It's nothing new. But in their minds, we're just not doing them well enough. And therefore, there's a highlight on this in the SOQM standard. We now need to demonstrate, well, show me how you are assigning your teams. How do you make sure these people have the right qualification? If they're doing SOX engagement or US engagement, how do you make sure that they've got the right training and that they are qualified before you assign them to the teams? In large complex firms, we've got team members moving in and out. In fact, we are probably hiring new hires on a real-time daily basis. So assignments are really challenging area. I think it will be one of the areas that we will continue to improve. But the challenge now is we have to demonstrate that we are giving sufficient thought to this and having the right amount of responses around the risk to ensure we staff all our engagement, no matter how complex they are, in a sufficient way. So in this area, again, we continue to do a lot of work to enhance our processes in this area. Resources, Len has covered a lot. I just wanted to say, as you can expect, HR is one of the components which, in my mind, has the largest number of controls and processes and responses, because it is supposed to cover from us onboarding new staff to their training, to thus evaluating their performances and compensation. So all the risk around just handling our human resources needs to be addressed in this area. It's a good time. It's good to get the right people involved. Very importantly, HR team, and even wider than that as you try to tackle this area. So just quickly on the IT, since IT and intellectual area, since Len's mentioned it's new, on top of QC standard in the IT. Don't forget that if you most of us will have systems in place that we rely on to carry out our processes. Then there will be a need to take a look at how to see how you ensure these systems are working. Do you test the automated controls, and how do you monitor them? So this is part of the M&R of the component that will need to be built in as you tackle the IT resources area. Of course, with intellectual resources, your professional practice areas and your risk areas, this is what it's talking about. How they support our engagement teams. They're a huge part, important part of ensuring audit quality. So the risk associated with them and how the firm supports their operation is what this component is trying to address. Moving very quickly onto information and communication, perhaps a comfortable one to talk about for all of us, but again, also quite a big swing from how we usually think about it when you look at what the standard's trying to get us to do. I found that it's helpful to start, particularly for the external part of things, because I think where I practice in China, we don't have external reporting requirements. I know in Australia we've got the transparency report, and of course in the EU as well. But it's wider than that. So we need to take a serious look at where, as a practice, we are responsible to communicate. And service providers is one that's pointed out in the standard. We don't typically think about them as having to communicate, but so starting a stock take of the list of people whom our practices impact and that impact us would be a good way to start. Internally, I assume for most practices, particularly larger ones, we've got very well set out processes, and it works and ticks like clockwork in terms of internal communication. But the new aspect of that is also the bottoms up communication. Because our people see what's happening on the ground, it is important we capture adequately that information because it's a critical part of the iterative process of ensuring audit quality. So those are the two aspects I wanted to point out as quite new in terms of where the standard's trying to take us to. And again, on documentation, I'll quickly before I leave this component. There are, do think about communications planned that you might want to formalize so that you can demonstrate that communication is something we don't think about just as on an ad hoc basis, but we do have a systematic approach to information and communication. Finally, on monitoring and remediation, Len's reminded us this is one of the maybe top 3 areas where regulators like to talk to us about and think it is an essential part of ensuring SOQM works. And then we just need to remember, importantly, that we need to execute M&R monitoring and remediation on all the components. We need to demonstrate that our activities covers all components. I would expect that practices when we talk about monitoring, we talk about monitoring our engagement teams, in-flight monitoring, and maybe post as well. But this is talking about monitoring of all components. So it's a good time to have a stock take on what programs we already have in place, and what needs to be added on to make sure we cover the loop adequately as well. So then moving on, just quickly on network requirements, Len talked about this a little bit as well. I just wanted to point out that it is, in my personal experience, an iterative process of working through what, as a firm, we would expect to see and to be able to demonstrate that we can rely on what we get from KPMG International, for example, and your respective networks. So it is quite a different way of thinking about demonstrating compliance with these requirements. The standard talks about not readily relying on networks services and demonstrating that we've considered that. So from my experience, it is quite a different mindset to try and tackle this suite of requirements to demonstrate to regulators that we've done that. So a bit of quick reminders on that. So before I hand over to Liz, I've also done what Len did. Quickly on takeaways, Len's covered a few. My last point is do think about documentation early as we walk through the processes. Try to think about how you want to present your SOQM at the end of the day, and your risk assessment processes, and your M&R processes as well. So start getting that early and assume that will be an iterative process as we get into regulators coming through our door to look at what we've done in the first year and enhancing that. So sorry I've taken a bit of time, but quickly I'll hand over to Liz. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessie. Okay. Now, as Len said early on, and I know what you're all thinking, that's what the global regulator says, it's scalable, etc. I'm here in the time that we've got left to really demonstrate to you through my big announcement that actually ASQM1 is scalable. If we think about the four-step process that both Len and Jessie have alluded to, I'm going to take you through a very granular approach to this through my bit of the session. So the four-step process doesn't change if you're a network firm or you're an individual practitioner. So what you see there in terms of what Jessie and Len articulate as a system of quality management, obviously these processes don't change in terms of the quality objectives, but the effort changes quite considerably. So poor old Jessie's over there with the big digger there. She's got a lot to do in terms of multiple offices, in her instance in China, and being part of the global team as well. They've got a lot to do. If you've got a couple of small offices, you're a small, say, Australian network, and you've got only got a couple of offices, there's a bit of digging to do, but obviously not as much heavy lifting as the larger networks. And if you're a single office or you're a single practitioner, there's probably less to do in terms of the level of digging that you have to get to. And I'll explain what I mean by this digging, what Liz's digging concept in a minute. So if we move on to, and as I said to you, I'm taking a very granular approach to try and help you guys articulate how you're actually going to get, some bones around what's required. And my focus here is only on ASQM1. So there are 6 quality objectives in the standard, what I call tagline objectives. So the highest level objectives. What I've done here is, I must admit, when I was looking at the standard and the implementation guidance, I saw the words governance and leadership, and I thought, well, that's nice. So what I've done is I've done something really simple, and this is what I suggest you think about. I've added the word effective because that's the objective we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve effective governance and leadership. We're trying to achieve effective acceptance and continuance of client relationships. I've added a different word in terms of quality, engagement, performance. That's what our key objective is, and effective resource allocation. So all of what Jessie and Len have been talking about, but what I've done now for you is just switched it on its head a bit and said, okay, while we're looking at these tagline objectives, these are the sorts of things that we need to think about. So it makes it a bit easier, if you like, to then understand, okay, now I get what we're talking about. Under what I call the tag objectives, or the top line headline objectives, are what's known in the standard as, or what Liz calls, the sub-objectives. Now I'm going to play one out all the way through with you now. So I've taken the effective governance and leadership as the headline objective. And then I've listed here what the standard puts as all the sub-objectives that are needed in support of meeting the headline objective. So that's all what's in the standard. I've changed the words slightly to make it more easier for firms to understand. When you're doing that, though, be very careful that you're not changing the meaning of what is actually in the standard. You may also in your firm have other sub-objectives that you think are important to your firm in terms of what's needed to ensure that you get effective governance and leadership. So none of that changes, no matter if you're KPMG or whether you're a one-person practice. But what does change is how you start to think about it. If I go to my next slide, if I look at the sub-objective from the ones on the previous slide and take one of them, the organisational structure and assignment of roles and responsibility and authority is appropriate to ensure the design, implementation and operation of the firm's system of quality management. So what Jessie explained to you in a network perspective, where you've got a large network, this diagram, which came out of one of the IAASB's webinars, demonstrates that for a large firm, it's likely to be a lot of people. For a small firm, it may be one or two people. For those of you that are in firms where leadership don't have an assurance background, you're going to have to take them through what Jessie suggested in her session and explain how the importance of a system of quality management works with engagement level quality initiatives. So, as I said, if you're a one-person firm or a few offices, obviously the number of people or your organisational structure is not going to be anywhere near as complex as the bigger end of town. If we explore further, so there's that effective governance and leadership. There's that quality sub-objective. What we need to do in determining what the risks are of meeting those objectives, and now, as we've said, it's taking a very much a risk management profile, is what are the condition, events or circumstances, actions or inactions that may put that sub-objective and the overall objective at risk. So that's what the standard's asking you to do. So what I've done here is just given some examples, and probably what would have been more helpful is I've done some examples for network firms as well. These conditions, events and circumstances are very different in a network environment it is to a single firm. So if you've just got one leader, the quality risk might be, the change to the system of quality management may actually not get the recognition that it deserves or is acknowledged. That may be the risk. Leadership style, the leader might be too close to staff who won't challenge the leader in terms of the quality of the assurance work conducted by the firm. The firm may struggle in terms of being able to demonstrate that they have sufficient resources to support the system of quality management. So they might be some of the risks around that sub-objective. So what I'm trying to do is map out one all the way through for you so you can see what we mean and give it a bit more granularity. So if I go to the next slide, what I've done then is looked at the response. Now, actually, I should go back to this slide and make a couple of further observations. In terms of your quality risks that may arrive, one of the things that you need to determine at the back of that is this concept that under ASQM1, you only have to provide a response to quality risks that are deemed by you to be reasonably possible. So what does that mean? For those of you who have implemented APES 325 and you understand the risk management basis of that particular standard, then you've got a heads up. Because what 325 talks about, it talks about this concept of likelihood and consequence. So what the global standard has done is for something to be reasonably possible, you need to assess the occurrence of that risk and the effect of that risk. So if they're likely to be minimal to the firm, then you actually are not required by ASQM1 to develop a response. But if it is reasonably possible or greater, it's likely to be significant impact, then you are required under the standard to develop a response. So what I've assumed in this next slide is that we've met the criteria and we think that these are reasonably possible risks and that a response is required. So I've just given some examples there of the, what you may need to put in place to respond to the quality risk based on the conditions, events and circumstances, actions or inactions in your actual firm. So there are some examples for you there. So leadership responsibilities needs to be clearly documented. Might be, to conduct a periodic anonymous 360-degree feedback on your leadership styles, so it becomes clear to leaders that their behaviour has to change if it does. Conduct a zero-based assessment of the level of resources might be something else that you might like to think about in terms of adequacy of resources. But they're just some thoughts there as sort of a starting point to help you think about it. The one thing that you also need to be aware of is ASQM1 stipulates required responses to a number of areas. I've given you a couple of examples of what sits in paragraph 34 of ASQM1, but, a lot of what you'll see in those areas are likely not to be new to you, but I strongly encourage you to take the opportunity to update and revise your responses where you can. Make sure that this does not sit outside of your system of quality management, that it sits within the system of quality management, and that you've clearly linked the requirements to where the responses and solutions sit. Finally, and I know I've gone quickly because I want to give you guys the best opportunity to ask us as many questions as you like. What might your system of quality management look like? Obviously, the bigger end of town have got all these sophisticated databases, but it can be as easy as creating Excel spreadsheets, not probably dissimilar to what you did with APES 325. That might be supplemented with, if you've got an intranet or you've got some form of, system within your firm that you can set up subfolders. You'll probably use the use of Word documents. So it's about an ability to perhaps link. Start with Excel would be my recommendation. Go through what I've sort of tried to explain to you today very quickly in terms of you're going to have to identify all your objectives, all your sub-objectives, all your risks to your sub-objectives, and then all your responses. And you're going to have to build in, if we think about the 4 steps, build in an ability for you to refresh and think about it on an ongoing basis. Because as Liz said, and was consolidated by what Jessie said, this is not like ASQC1. This is not a manual that we write once and put it on the shelf. This is a breathing and living mechanism that people need to understand is going to take time. But it's really important that you understand that this whole system of quality management, to take Jessie's example, is really to support you to ensure that when you go to that restaurant and when your clients go to that restaurant, they enjoy the meal. So I will leave it there and I will hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Len and Jessie too. We really appreciate you sharing your insight and experience with us today. So far, everyone's a bit quiet in the Q&A, so I'd encourage you, if you've got a burning question, now's an excellent opportunity to put it to our panel of experts. I do have a couple on my mind though, so while we maybe wait for people to give us a question, Len, I could start with you. This is a big change. I think I even had someone say this week it's like the biggest change in our lifetime to quality management in audit. So how confident are you that imposing this on firms, the benefits really outweigh the costs?
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for that question. Just want to make sure the audio is still working, right, from my end, so you can hear me. Great. The benefit cost, as a former regulator in the U.S., when I was participating in the Section 404 Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that question was also raised. Internal control, financial reporting at the entity level, and being in that process almost 20 years ago now, involved in the IWSP process. I can say that the cost benefit discussion sometimes is not easy to respond. I think from my early experience with Section 404 has been the benefit. I think the benefit, we can measure costs, but the cost also is not a defined term. The reason is costs, if you don't do a high quality audit, the cost of reputation costs, litigation costs, and also regulatory administration penalty costs. So in terms of benefit, profession globally, as you probably have heard, the reputation risk and a number of considerations. But at the end of the day, in terms of benefit, from a firm level, it's in terms of how you manage your system of quality management. How do you ensure that everything you do from one engagement to the other, staff from staff A, staff B, when they go out and perform engagement, they provide consistent, high quality service with right professional judgment, and also the firm providing enough resources, technical resources, in terms of professional standard support. It's all very important. So I would say the benefit would be, consistency, raising the bar. The IWSB firmly believes that with the new quality management standards, will improve quality. Also, more important, the greater confidence of the public in our profession. But if we have to go down to dollars and cents, sometimes it's hard to translate. It's just that it's so different from if I'm a car manufacturer, I spend all this investment in my production line, quality control, and hopefully that when people driving the car will recognize the high quality, the performance of the car. They'll come back and buy another car from me. Of course, the car is more tangible. This is intangible. Is the output, reduction to inspection finding, less audit failure, but also just pinpoint on a resource. Focus on quality, tone out top culture, will encourage people to enter the profession, to stay in the profession. So those are all benefit that is sometimes hard to measure. But of course, I think Liz and Jesse pointed out that initial stage, initial investment to spend time to invest in technology. But Liz, I think she raised a really, really good point that that firms of different sizes, you don't have to have a sophisticated technology. You just want to make sure people spend the time and take initiative to get involved. I think that's a cost. It's human cost in terms of time cost. That actually is up to each individual practice. Make sure that you start the process, you invest in that. So overall, I think from a standard setting perspective, we do think that the benefit will outweigh cost, but the IWSB has taken on the responsibility in terms of post-implementation. Once the standards are effective, we're going to start talking to the practitioner, large and small, and also talking to a regulator, whether maybe there might be some tricking to be done. Maybe we over-engineer it. But at a principal level, if you recall from the diagram I presented earlier, that framework is nothing new. It's very much modeled on after the COSO framework. And if I keep rolling back to the internal control of financial reporting, right now investors and also corporate governance people feel that having sound internal control actually provide greater investor confidence. More people want to invest in that company, and also trusting the management, their leadership in managing the company. So hopefully that the standards will perform and achieve its intended purposes. But let's turn back to you.
Great, thank you, Len. We do have a question in the chat from Brian, and Liz, I think I might put this to you first. How do you think these changes affect small audits? So I guess I want to pair that up with what's the key focus for someone who's maybe doing small audits or not-for-profits or SMSF? What is the key thing they need to get right in implementing a system of quality management for it to be effective?
I think what's really important to understand is if you're in the audit, any assurance space, this standard is applicable to everybody. So that's not just external audit, don't forget either. If you're providing other forms of assurance under the other assurance standards issued by the AUASB, this standard applies to you as well. To Brian's point, the system of quality management, as Jessie pointed out, sits next to audit engagement. So if you're a firm doing small type audits, SMSFs, that sort of thing, the system of quality management needs to, obviously sit aside with those. But I think, as I tried to demonstrate through my presentation, it is what you put in place is scalable based on the engagements that you have. So the types of risks associated with the engagements that you have need to be taken into consideration, and that really comes down to some of the other aspects of the system of quality management in engagement, performance, etc. So I hope that answers the question. It's a difficult one because the system of quality management needs to be seen to be sitting with the execution of the audit or assurance engagements.
Excellent, thank you, Liz.
Yes,
go for
and then it's Jessie. If I may, just to add on to the responses by the panelists before, particularly on the not-for-profits and the SMSFs, I think it's an aspect that perhaps came through subtly in the presentations. Is the applicability of the standard. So just quick reminder, it's not just the audit people that will be affected. As the system is targeted, and the way IAASB has, and the percentage that it has scoped is that it talks to the type of engagements rather than the practice. It is the audits, the reviews, the assurance, and even the related services. So a whole suite of things, and I can envisage it in Australian context that would cover a whole suite of sizes of practitioners, even with the large firms where you have got advisory practices that performs services that falls into the scope. They are SOQM, they have to be SOQM compliant. So I think Liz's point is really important as we think about the size of the practice and how it influences how we put the system in place. Don't forget as well that there is an engagement perspective to this to make sure we pick all of them up. In my personal case, that's exactly what we've had to do as well. And even in a large network, there is also a whole spectrum of sizes of firms. So I hope that helps people start thinking. And then just on Len's point about the value, I think that is a really great question. And it is a question that for those of us online that's in charge of putting this in place and making sure it works, that we have an answer to this. Because buy-in from the organization, buy-in from our senior leadership, that is the question that they're going to ask. Perhaps going back to my restaurant example, no matter how brilliant chefs you've got, no matter how enthusiastic serving staff you have, if you don't have a nice restaurant setting and if you don't have good quality raw ingredients, you're never going to get that perfect meal. You're never going to get that Michelin star output that you really want. So I again, it's going back to communicating why we're doing this before how we're doing it. Thanks.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. So, Jessie, while I've got you then, you mentioned that this has been on your mind for months already. So, for someone who's with us today that hasn't started and is thinks only just now turning their mind to this, it's been a challenging 2 years. We've all been consumed with COVID implications. So, I guess you've said, let's get started, turn your mind to the standards now. What do you think it looks like for the rest of the year and being ready for implementation in December?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you've got standard setters and regulators online, but I think, Melissa, your point is really important. We're doing this in the middle of COVID. In fact, the standards being issued in the middle of COVID. In an ideal circumstances, we've got all teams, we've got everyone in the office, and we can start the project happening. We can have team meetings and whatnot, but that's just not possible in today's circumstances. And a lot of us are doing this virtually, whether we like it or not. I don't want to send the message that for people who are starting on their journey that it is late in the game. It all depends on the starting point that we're all working from. But I think I'm just thinking where Len and I and Liz started out on our slide. Think about the risk assessment process, where the standards are new. How am I going to start doing that? Start communicating and getting everyone on board. That will, that's probably in my mind very much half the battle won. Then the whole process. Once you get your start thinking about your risk assessment process and where you want to lead that, you'll quickly find that you can work through the components very systematically, and not all components require the same effort depending on our own starting points. Challenging ones, as I've said, governance, because the standard setters just spend so much time, human resources, because inherently it is already very challenging because of talent issues. So I think the questions and the challenges that we'll meet, it will not be anything new that practitioners don't think about when they go to sleep at night. The challenge for us now is that we have to take them seriously, in fact, document them as our risk, and give it a really good, strong goal at trying to put some really good responses around it. And don't forget, in our conversations with regulators, this is an iterative process. The standard setters told us that it's not a project. We're not supposed to get it right in the first instance. And that's the message I've been sending to our teams. It's an ongoing process. And the way I refer it to my team members is, look, guys, this is the new reality. SOQM is our new reality. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jessie. So I guess, Liz, with that in mind, if I can pop back over to you and your digging example, that I know we were conscious of time, and whether you wanted to touch back on that and talk to that small or medium firm implementing this, and what you've seen in practice, how big a challenge it is for them, and any advice you could give them on their digging.
Look, I think depending on who the leadership in the firm is, and I touched on that briefly. If you've got a business advisory type, partner, or director, however you call them in your firms, that is the leader, I think you've got a bit more work on your hands in terms of trying to get them to actually understand what the system of quality management is. I know previously under ASQ C1, there were some leadership messages, and again, sort of people got roles. I'm not sure, particularly in mid to smaller firms. Again, as I alluded to earlier, that was kind of like, okay, we'll put them on their names on a page and put it in a manual, and the manual goes on the shelf until somebody external to the firm asks us to pull the manual off. Well, this is completely different from that. And as I alluded to, for those firms that have successfully implemented APS 325, then the jump in ASQM1 shouldn't be as big in terms of how to think about the quality risks. So I think it's going to be a challenge. The other thing I'll pull out of discussion as well is that all of these firms on this call who provide external audit services are also in the process in 2022 of implementing ASA 315. Now, interestingly, guys, ASA 315 takes a similar approach obviously off the back of ISA 315, in looking at likelihood and magnitude. So the concepts that you're learning through the ASQM1 implementation process, I think will take you a long way to helping you understand that multi-dimensional sort of approach to assessing inherent risks on an audit, assessing quality risks under ASQM1. So if you haven't started, you need to start, because it's the identification of risks as they're appropriate to you, what your situation is, what your circumstances are, what actions you have in your firm, what inactions you have in your firm, and depending on how well matured your system of ASQC1 was, will vary your effort as well in terms of what you may need to put in place in response to the reasonably possible risks that you have identified.
So,
Great.
so Melissa, if you don't mind, I'd like to come in for a second.
Yes.
I just want to emphasize the point Liz has raised. When we develop ISQM1, this is very much based on what we did with ISA 315. I know ISA 315 just become effective, and that whole risk assessment process that Jesse and Liz have been talking about is very much based on what we did with ISA 315, 315. And it's very important that when you assess all the risk and other risks in performing your engagement, you basically taking the same approach in doing risk assessment for yourself, in designing, implementing system of quality management. So I want to make sure that the people on the audience, I know the 315, 315 is effective. It's probably, if you haven't started yet, probably a good idea to look at 315 and come back to ISQM1. That'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Len. So we do have one question in the chat. How do you plan and implement a risk assessment process if all audit tasks are performed by the same person, that is in the sole practitioner environment? So between Jesse and Liz, I'm thinking Liz might want to start there.
Well, if you're a sole practitioner, and again, you know, that comes back down to your conditions, events, circumstances, you still have to obviously have in place a system of quality management. But I think it's going to look a lot less complex than even what I've demonstrated in my slides today. So if you're the leader and the only person that works in the organisation, then I think your quality risks are going to have to be insightful to your personal behaviours. That's probably what I would recommend. So it's going to look a lot smaller than firms that have got more than one person in it. That's for certain.
Okay, and I think we've just had one extra question, which we'll be able to squeeze in. It says, ASIC is the regulator body for listed company audits, reviewing audit quality. Which body will be reviewing this for smaller audits and especially SMSF audits? Will it be the ATO checking compliance or SMSF audits? Without,
So SMSFs will definitely be the ATO. If you're not in the listed external audit space, then it will be Melissa and her team looking at your compliance with ASQM1 and the other quality management standards.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, well, I think we've addressed all the questions that we've had in the chat, and want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us again today, Len, Jesse and Liz. We really appreciate it. We know that as CPA, we have a role to play here in supporting our members in practice, and this won't be a set and forget webinar. We'll definitely be in touch with our members and looking at what other tools and resources we can produce. We're already got the ball rolling on what current tools we have and how we can revise them and help you all implement this in real life. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll hand back to Helen.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Len, Jesse, and Liz for a great presentation today. And I also want to thank you to everyone for your participation online today. In the next 3 working days, you will receive an evaluation survey accompanied by the recording of this webinar. We really appreciate your feedback as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us to deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon. Bye, everyone.